Hello and welcome to a special episode of Empires of History podcast. I am your host, Frank Schumpert, and joining me is historical fiction author Dan Cross. I met Dan on Twitter a few days back and learned that his work, Caesar of Mercenaries, had been shortlisted for the 2018 Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize in Best Unpublished Manuscript. A literary agent represents Dan's work, and I'm confident that it will soon be destined for wherever fine books are sold, and then finally resting on all of our bookshelves. You can also follow Dan on Twitter at DanCrossAuthor, all one word. If you check out the Empires of History website, click Author Interviews tab, and you can find links to this episode available in iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify, in addition to links to Dan's website. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the show. I have on the show today Dan. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Frank. Lovely to be here.
And Dan, can you please tell the listeners where they can find you at?
Yeah, it's www.dan-cross.com.
Okay, and you are an author of historical fiction, is that correct?
That's right, yes.
All right, and currently, what kind of work, where's your work at as we're speaking now, so listeners can know?
So at the moment, it's I'm not a published author, so I have a wonderful agent, a woman named Charlotte Colwell from Bravo Blue, who is representing me, and as of about a week, 2 weeks ago, she has started contacting publishers with the book. So I'm afraid you can't read anything just yet, but if you take a look at my website, I'll be sure to let you all know once it's available.
Well, that sounds incredible. So you actually have an agent. That's something very, very special, isn't it, for authors out there?
It's amazing how before you make that decision, I want to be an author, there are so many assumptions of, so I've just got to write the book and get it published. Fantastic. And it's really not like that at all. It's a very, very long process. You need a lot of patience. And the first big hurdle is writing a book. That's a hell of a challenge. The second big hurdle is getting that agent. Unfortunately, publishers are so busy. So many people want to write great books and get them out there, and publishers don't have time to read every email and every letter that comes their way. So the modern sort of age of publishing a book requires that you need that agent to get your foot in the door, so to speak.
Definitely. I believe I read an article in Forbes magazine not too long ago that said that I believe it was the 1990s is when the great, the publishing houses began to switch to agents only, and they began to, and they stopped, accepting the unsolicited manuscripts because they were just getting flooded out. There's so much
absolutely, yeah. So it's as an author, it's slightly frustrating that it's such a slow process, but I completely understand it. It's the industry is what it is.
Definitely so, and a lot of the authors who I've spoken to, both published and unpublished, it's really funny because no matter where they're at in their publishing career, finding the agent in a lot of ways is something that they will always, they'll take with them wherever they go. They always have a wonderful, interesting story about it. Something from as crazy as being, rejected by as much as 300 agents, and then finding the one who fell in love with their book and was able to take that enthusiasm to an editor so it could eventually be published. But that's definitely the most important part of it. Yeah, you're right. Is you need to have someone who believes in your work, and that's exactly what you need when you find a publisher as well. You need that person who feels as enthusiastically about it as you do, because they're ultimately the ones selling it to everyone else. And so I'm very fortunate to have found Charlotte, who feels as passionate about the book as I do. But I have those same stories. I initially tried
soliciting agents with, the standard practices. You send an email, the first 3 chapters, and just a quick synopsis of what the book is about.
The synopsis
And
sounds like a difficult thing to write too. I mean, I was reading the synopsis of your novel, and I was thinking to myself, if I had Dan's novel in front of me, I don't know if I could have written a synopsis this good. I mean, it was
Frank,
kinda...
I think without a doubt, it's harder than writing the book. It's it's so difficult to, you've got to get the essence of your story, which, you try and make it. You want it to be accessible, but you want it to have layers. You want to have characters with meaning. You want it to have an exciting plot, and to get all that into 100, 200 words, it's very difficult. But we manage it somehow.
Oh yeah, well, you certainly did a wonderful job. What advice can you give the beginning author who hasn't yet found an agent, but they're trying to find an agent? They haven't received anything at all. It's just been the crushing silence of crickets. What kind of advice could you author or give those authors, do you think?
Well, what worked for me was it wasn't through actually soliciting agents that got me Charlotte's attention. It was entering into an award. So
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
tell us about that.
Unfortunately, so what happened? I'll explain briefly what happened to me, and then I'll try and generalize it a little bit more to answer your question. So I've been writing for a number of years now, and whilst Caesar of Mercenaries, I should say the name of the book, Caesar of Mercenaries is my debut novel, as in that's the one I'm trying to get published. I've written other manuscripts before, which I've tried to solicit.
Okay.
And with each new one, anyone listening who's an author will know this. With each new manuscript you write, you get a little better. You learn a few more lessons, and one of the lessons I learned from writing my previous manuscripts to writing Caesar of Mercenaries was I really need an editor. I need someone to.
Yes.
Yeah, I have no formal training in writing a book. I didn't study literature at university or anything like that. So it's a self-taught skill, and I needed someone who had a few fingers in the industry and had some experience and was able to look at my work and say with total honesty, this works, this is great, this is awful, get rid of this.
Yeah.
So I worked with an editor who I found online, and one thing he suggested to me was, well, look, Dan, why don't you enter this into the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Award? Now, for listeners who don't know what this is an annual award set up by the author, Wilbur Smith, and his wife, and their charity, the Wilbur and Niso Smith Foundation. Okay. And every year they offer a prize to the best published adventure writer, the best unpublished adventure writer, and kind of the author for tomorrow. So, a youth category. So, and this is where it's a bit tricky, because this Wilbur Smith Award is one of the very few awards available to non-published writers. So there are plenty of awards out there, but most of them, your book already needs to be on the shelves, or you've got that publishing contract. Yeah. Whereas if you don't have any of that, there are very few. But the Wilbur Smith Award is available, and it's available to enter from all over the world. The only criteria is that it needs to be written in English, and it has to have some form of adventure to it. Now, that can be a personal journey, it can be an epic across time and space, whatever you want. So it's super, diverse and open, and that's a wonderful thing. So my editor suggested, well, look, Dan, this is an adventure in many ways, and so you definitely meet the criteria. Why didn't you enter? And I sent it off, and I thought it was going to be exactly like all the emails I'd sent off to agents
Nothing happens
previously. Yeah, you know, I wait a few weeks. Yeah, and you either hear nothing or you get, you know, a very polite but often unhelpful rejection letter. You know, you never get any feedback, anything like that. But no, lo and behold, in March last year, I think it was March or maybe it was May, I got an email saying I'd been shortlisted into the final 5 for the best unpublished category.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, as you can imagine, that was a jaw to the floor moment, and it took me a few minutes to compose myself. And then what's also wonderful is there is an agent attached to the Wilbur Smith Award. So last year that was Charlotte from Bravo Blue. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. Maybe she's doing it again this year. I haven't spoken to her, so I don't know.
Okay.
But that agent then looks at the shortlisted entries and decides, is this something I want to represent? And that's what happened with me. Charlotte, I got an email from Charlotte in August last year saying, "Hi Dan, I've read Caesar of Mercenaries, and I love it, and I'd love to represent you."
That's an incredible response to it.
It's amazing. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing, and it's a hard one. It's just another way, you know, for writers and aspiring authors to get their work out there and get agents to have their eyes on it, because it is a very disheartening process at times when you need to just, you know, you're just sending your work out to agents because you don't really know what they're looking for. There's exactly. A kind of there's this kind of standard template, which as I described is first 3 chapters, a 1-page synopsis, and a brief cover letter explaining your work, why you wrote it, who it's for. But every agent's different, and a lot of them are you know, they're very good. They put on their websites, this is what we want, this is how we want you to submit, this is how long it will take to hear from us. But because you don't get that personalized response, because there's no time really for them to you know, customize a response to every single author coming their way, it means that you just get this flurry of, you know, unless you're very lucky, you get this flurry of rejections saying, "Oh, this is a wonderful work, but it's not for us."
But it's like a form letter type.
Yeah, and then you're just like, is it really wonderful, or are you just telling me that? And why is it not for you? Do you think it's not for you, or do you think no one would like it? You know, you don't get anything to work with. So after about, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 rejections, you get into this stage of, am I doing something wrong? And because there's no one there to tell you. So it's hard. So that's why I would say to aspiring authors, look at, you know, what awards and competitions are around, because it worked for me. And it's another way of getting that feedback and getting some validation. And the second thing I'd advise is also what I mentioned, which is to get an editor. If you can get an editor to look over some of your work and you know, give you some honest feedback.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That obviously helps as well. You know, it helps you see, you know, either they're going to tell you, "Oh no, look, this isn't great. You know, you need to change this," or, you know, "What about if you change this?" So you've got something to improve upon. Or they're going to say, "No, look, this is wonderful, but this is just how the industry is sometimes. Keep trying."
Yeah.
You know? So either way, it's worth it.
Well, that sounds incredible. And that seems to remind me of a saying that I picked up back in college: "To write is human, to edit is divine." Well, so what inspired you to write, Dan? I've kind of heard 2 stories, you know, whenever I speak with authors. The first one, and probably the most common, is I've always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a child. And then, you know, some writers and authors will have something happen in their life and they feel like they need to write about it. So where do you find yourself? Do you fit in one of those camps, or is there a third option for you?
I would say I probably fall in more into the first.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's always been something I've loved doing. It was my way of unwinding when I was a kid. You know, if I couldn't sleep well or something was on my mind, I'd get up and just start writing.
Incredible. Yeah.
But it's also I'm a real lover of stories, and I think sometimes in the world of literature there can be a kind of arrogance to, books are the best way to absorb a story. There's nothing better than a book. If they make it into a movie, I won't watch the movie or anything like that. I'm definitely not like that. I love to just absorb stories in whatever form they come, be it books, comics, movies, TV.
Incredible, yeah.
I much to my wife's disappointment, I love video games, and anything which to me, and when I say video games, I tend to mean single player, something like, I just want a story, something that can really transport me into a different world or a different life and conveys a message that's personal to me.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I've always loved doing that. And that's something I love to now want to be able to do for others. And especially when I combine that with my love of history, it's, the saying goes, I've forgotten the saying. What is it? The best stories are true, something to that effect,
Okay.
And I want to be able to tell those stories. And we live in this internet age where information is so accessible that every day I'm learning about new people and new events in history that I just think are utterly amazing. And, I want to share those stories with people who aren't normally inclined to, go down the Wikipedia rabbit hole and discover these people, or, spend hours flicking through books reading about, some obscure war that then led into, something much
unless
more.
You're us.
Unless
you're us. So,
exactly. That's it. I mean, I imagine your listeners are more like you and I, and that's why they're listening. They're fascinated by these things. But there's so much history to cover, and if you really want to know any period or any person in great detail, you need to dedicate your time.
That is true.
And that means you can't then, you may overlook other interesting periods and interesting eras. And so what I hope to use my writing for is to bring some, incredible stories, some personal, some epic, to wider audiences who might otherwise not know about these things.
Definitely. And Dan, it's really incredible because, they say that we're living in a golden age of podcasts and the new media format. And what you're really seeing is a return of the humanities. I mean, it's a return of history, of literature, of philosophy, of art. Whenever I talk to people who are fans of history, it's something where they've always been drawn to it. But, I think our school system, at least the public school education system, kind of burns our love of all things transcendent out of us.
It can be tricky, can't it? We have this, we have the same in the UK. We have that, we have the habit of, shoving so much down, into kids' brains that they, so they can pass an exam, that they lose the love for it, and they don't get any choice either. Now I come from a family of teachers, so I understand the pressures that teachers are under. To they have to. Teachers aren't the ones that set the syllabus. It's the government body behind the schools, and so these teachers are put under a lot of pressure to get these kids to be able to pass these exams. But it means teaching is done in a way that it's so fast and so furious that there's not always time for passion, which is a real shame. And that's something I found with my own love of history. I always enjoyed history at school, but there was never time to really fall in love with it because we were always on to the next thing.
To really to delve,
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, to really to kind of
And of
delve into
course,
it.
and I think the UK does the same as the US, which is, we tend to focus on modern history
Hmm.
and, things we were involved in, so, we talk a lot about the British Empire in the UK. And,
I can
I think,
imagine so.
and I think in the US, you guys cover a lot of the Civil War and
Oh
things like
yeah,
that.
Revolutionary War,
Whereas,
the Civil War,
when
and World War II. That's about it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you tend to, when you're very young, you might cover the Egyptians and the Greeks, and then suddenly you jump forward to World War II, and it's like, oh, well, what happened in the middle?
Exactly. Yeah.
There was quite a lot, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not only that, I mean, it isn't just that, in the classrooms nowadays, they focus on certain historical events. But, I've always noticed as a student was this kind of cynicism. And I'm not sure if it's a result of a postmodern mind, but they seem to hate anything that has the possibility of creating an overarching narrative of history. Like they want the world to be chaos. They don't want to think that there's comedy, that there's tragedy, and that in some kind of weird way, and I don't mean to sound like a metaphysical crazy person, but
Yeah.
it's like history is a stage. And when you read about these historical actors, whether it's corrupt popes, whether it's emperors, whether they're sultans, they're dealing with things that we deal with today, and it's very human problems that they're dealing with. And they looked at the humanities and history as being able to teach us something about ourselves. But
Yeah.
it seems like with the advent of the historical critical method under Hegel, that we've come to a point where we hate the idea of transcendence and nothing's real anymore. I mean, it's like my teachers in high school and in college, their attitude toward history was, well, we think that the Ottoman Empire did X, Y, and B, but we don't really know because the sources, they're either shaky or nothing probably happened, or another generation's going to come after us and they're going to disprove everything that we know and believe about them. So it's just like this excessive cynicism that I found towards the historian's field. And when I look at other podcasts, whether it's the Age of Victoria podcast or any one of these wonderful shows, they're folks who have a real love of history and they think it has something to teach us. But I don't know if you've kind of encountered that pushback, but
Well, I'd say absolutely, and it's one of the the difficult thing is there is a reason that cynicism exists.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And you have to respect it. But I also agree with you that it's okay to look beyond it a little bit and let the romance back into history.
That's right.
So you have this. So, for instance, one of the challenges of writing historical fiction is you have to do a hell of a lot of research.
Oh yeah.
Now, fortunately, that's something I love doing because I'm a big nerd and I wear that label very proudly. And it's and so I love doing that. But you have to really know your stuff to be able to then craft a story from it. And that means coming across a lot of sources which tend to conflict with each other, or even totally contradict. I've read when I was researching Caesar of Mercenaries,
especially in your time period too. I mean, there's a lot of conflicting information. Yeah.
Oh, as soon as you go back sort of before the 15th, 14th century, you are really, at the whim of, propaganda.
Oh,
and, yeah. Very inaccurate reporting. And so what the way historians try and tackle this is to get as many sources as possible from a wider reaching area as they can and look for, okay, what's the common thread between all these sources. But sometimes that's not possible, when the main character of my novel, Caesar of Mercenaries, is a guy called Roger de Flor. Now, we know very, very little about him. And most of what we know about him comes from an account that was written by a guy who was chronicling the events of Roger de Flor and his mercenary group, the Catalan Company.
Yeah.
Now, but he was a member of this Catalan Company, and when you read this account,
so it's going to be completely unbiased, right?
Oh, yes,
it's completely unbiased.
They went in and they liberated people. They saved them from themselves, and people were throwing flowers and giving them gifts as they marched their army peacefully into the city. You read this and you're like, of course this didn't happen. And then through but unfortunately, because he's a guy who's not very well known, he wasn't reported by name in many other sources. However, the Catalan Company was, and I would then research the people they were fighting against, and lo and behold, the accounts are quite different. But how you deal with this then as an author becomes a choice. You can see this as a problem, or you can see this as something quite liberating. So what was wonderful about not only having a main character who not many people know about throughout history, but also one with very, very conflicting accounts, is you've got really a blank slate, an almost blank slate for a character who is going to be morally quite grey. And they're the best characters, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
The most real.
Mm-hmm.
So
the most human, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Human, yeah.
Exactly. And that's what humans are. And that's, I also have I said earlier I didn't study literature at university. I actually studied psychology, and I have a real interest. Yeah, I have a real interest in the human, in what it means to be human, and human philosophy and human sociology, and how we interact with each other and how we interact with ourselves. And I try and get that across in my characters. And that's where Roger de Flor was it felt like a gift when I discovered him, because I was like, right, here's someone I can really do something with. So you're right in that there is a lot of cynicism in history, especially in the academic side of things, because we live in a world where we want to be sure of the facts. But that doesn't necessarily translate very well into storytelling. And as I say, my passion is storytelling, and that is what I hope I will be doing if I get published professionally. And stories from the days when we sat around campfires in caves.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. we want a beginning, a middle, and an end. We want to have a character who goes on a journey and learns something along the way.
And it's really interesting that you bring it up. Yeah. The idea that humans have been telling stories ever since the days we were living in caves. I've heard two schools of thought on this whenever it comes to writing novels. I've heard that, the reason why, plot is in the format that it's in is simply because of how books are published. That there's a beginning, a middle, and end. There's a conflict, there's a resolution, there's a first act, a second act, and on and on.
Yeah.
Do you think that's more because that's simply how we're wired to think in our brains, or do you think it's more like, hey, this is just how we've always formatted our novels because when the Gutenberg press came out, this is how they did it?
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of heard two schools on that.
Personally, I think it's the former. I think we are wired to, I think it helps us to learn lessons. So stories were, we presume, came out of the idea that, at the time we didn't write things down. We just shared experiences through this happened to me the other day. The other day I was walking down by the river and I nearly got bitten by a snake. So be careful when you go down the river. And then we started wanting to tell grander and grander stories. We wanted to explain, why is there lightning in the sky, and where did life come from, and things like this. And we had to come up with ways of conveying incredibly complex ideas with, in ways that were easy to understand and easy to remember, so we could then pass those stories on to our own children. And if you tell things as they are all the time, it can be very hard to remember. So one of the reasons not everyone reads into history as much as you, me, and your listeners do, is because there is no beginning, middle, and end. There's always the next thing. Yeah. It always, that happened, and that caused this to happen, and that caused that to happen.
That's a great point, Dan. Yeah, that's something that I've never really considered before. But yeah.
Well, one thing I was looking at whilst I was preparing for this podcast today was I was thinking about how on your podcast you focus very much on the Ottomans, and the very end of Caesar of Mercenaries kind of starts to tie up with the very beginnings of the Ottoman Empire.
So this would have been what, about the 1300s, early 1300s, the Battle of Bathurst?
Exactly then.
Oh,
exactly
okay.
Then.
All right.
So basically, I'm going to try and not give too much away, although, as I say, my novel is based on history, so if people want spoilers, they can always look this up for themselves. But towards the end of the at the turn of the century, into the 1300s, the Europe was at the end of what was called the War of the Sicilian Vespers. Now, this was a time when France and kingdoms within France were battling with the Kingdom of Aragon over who would rule Sicily. And because of this infighting within Europe, there was a lot less attention paid to the Crusades. That allowed the Mamluk Sultanate to rise up in Egypt and start to take back a lot of the cities in the Holy Land. You also had at the same time the Golden Horde coming over with Genghis Khan and his kin, rampaging through Asia and the Middle East, and that was weakening empires as well. And what all this served to do was leave the Byzantine Empire very, very isolated. They were lacking the support from their European allies from all the infighting, and they were being confronted with all of these other warring empires that were growing around them. And that, as I say, when Genghis Khan came over, he and the Mongols, they weakened the Seljuks, and that eventually allowed for the rise of Osman and what would become the Ottoman Empire. So, there's all these amazing, what feels like coincidences. It was just things happened and it led to this. But when we look back at it with the hindsight, it feels like all these coincidences came together to allow these things to come together and to happen. So it's really interesting, but it makes it very complicated to tell people because all these things overlap. So if I want to tell people about the War of the Sicilian Vespers, I naturally then want to talk about the Mamluk Sultanates and the Golden Horde and the Ottoman Empire and everything else. But then it gets so complicated that people just tune out, or they forget the detail. So I think when we tell stories, we need to try and wrap them up with a beginning and an end, so that people can go, okay, I understand what happened there now. I understand where it started, where it ended, and what we learned along the way.
Definitely. And, the study of history is much like the peeling back of an onion. There's layer after layer. And there's always just been like this hidden unity. I mean, like you're saying, if it hadn't been for the Mongolian invasions, the Mamluks coming up from Egypt, then there may not have been an Ottoman Empire if the Byzantines hadn't been as weakened as they were. But yeah, so
Yeah,
oh yeah,
yeah.
so
And of course when the Crusaders decided to sack Constantinople as well, you know,
that's right, the Fourth
all these
Crusade,
little
right?
things.
I think it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And all these things happen, and you think, if any one of those things didn't happen, would we be where we are today? Would
Then
history
200 years
proceed?
later, this wouldn't have happened, and then this wouldn't have happened. Oh yeah, I mean it's very much
Exactly.
like a cause and effect there. So
Exactly.
I guess for me the draw of history has always been that there really isn't a beginning, middle, or end. It's just like you're studying a river, and you can't step into the same river twice, as Socrates said, or was it
Yeah.
Heraclitus? I can't exactly recall. But there's just this everlasting flow of it. I mean, it has no end or no beginning to it, and I've just always loved that, just being carried along in the currents of it, and just kind of being taken back in time. It's so much fun. But
And I think that's where the real draw
mhm.
is exactly that, is that you can constantly see all these coincidences and these cause and effects, and it's like a light bulb goes off every single time you discover one of those, you know. It's so much fun.
Oh yeah, for
Uh,
sure. Where do you see the future of the new media? You know, the videos, the YouTube, podcasts, and the like. Where do you see that affecting the writing and the craft of writing? I've heard different ideas, and I just wanted to kind of get your take on it, or
well, I mean,
even if.
I think there's always going to be room for writing. I think it's always going to be something that I think people will always love to read. But like I say, I think ultimately what people love is to consume
A good
either
story.
stories
Yeah.
or to consume knowledge. And I don't think it matters how you get that, how you consume your stories or your knowledge or whatever it is you're after, as long as you enjoy it. And I think I if whether that's writing um, to craft a novel or a movie script or a YouTube video, or whatever it is, I think as long as I don't think that's ever going to die. Um, the medium might change, but I mean, look at there's been the rise of ebooks, for instance, and Kindles, but people still love to go out and buy paperbacks. People love ebooks as well. There's room for everything.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, so can you give us an idea of the time period your novel's going to be in? I'm just so excited about it. I'm just trying to tease out as much. So we were kind of talking about the Byzantine Empire, and we were talking
That's
about
right. Yeah.
about the 13th century, I guess, or around that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
So
okay.
the
Without
novel
giving
the
too
novel
much
is
away, I'm
no,
so
no, no. That's
excited. Yeah.
okay. The novel very much focuses on the life and times of Roger de Flor. So
Okay.
ultimately, I'm hoping to craft a trilogy, at least a trilogy,
Oh, all
uh,
right. Yeah.
going into the Catalan company and the adventures of this mercenary group, because I just find them very, very interesting. But it all started with this Roger de Flor. So the first book very much focuses on his early life. So we're talking the end of the 13th century and the turn of the 14th century.
Okay. And
Yeah.
really quick, can you give us a quick, like a quick rundown of the Catalan company and what exactly were they? I heard you say that they were mercenaries, and uh,
That's right. Yeah.
mhm.
So it's a bit like I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier, and you mentioned slavery, back
Oh,
hundreds of
okay,
years
yeah,
ago, and how that our idea of slavery is very different to what we've grown up with, because
hmm
when we think of slavery, we tend to think of, again, modern history, and it was incredibly barbaric. Slavery from much earlier in history, there were still some horrible stories, but it was almost more of a business.
exactly, yeah,
So the idea of it changed. This is also the case of mercenaries. When you think of mercenaries today, you're thinking of hired guns going in and blowing stuff up. Um, Whereas back in the 13th century, mercenaries tended to be more They were soldiers for hire. Don't get me wrong, but they tended to be nobles, or the sons of noblemen, who maybe the second or the third son, the ones very unlikely to gain the inheritance of their fathers. And so they knew, well, if I'm going to go out, if I'm going to make a name for myself, or if I'm going to get any, a fortune worth crying about, I need to go out and win it for myself. So you had these mercenary groups form of these actually very well-spoken, well-to-do people, not all of them, but a lot of them, who would then offer their services to, they keep their ear to the ground and, oh, there's a war over there, or we can stir up some trouble over there, and we can make a lot of money doing it. So during the War of the Sicilian Vespers, which, as I say, is the background of the book, it was between kingdoms in France and the kingdom of Aragon. And around that area, you've got Catalan, you've got, the kingdom of Spain, Portugal, Aragon itself, and a lot of the sons of noblemen in these areas saw an opportunity to make a lot of money, so they formed a group called the Almogavars. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to hold you to it.
Yeah. Oh no. And they basically hired themselves out to Aragon to fight on their behalf over Sicily against France. Now, the problem with these mercenary groups is this specific group, the Almogavars, they proved themselves incredibly effective shock troopers. Now, up until this point, there was no real such thing as guerrilla warfare, but these guys kind of invented or helped make famous the idea of attacking an army who was unprepared very, very quickly, getting in the kills, and then running away again. And this was a very, very useful tactic, because it would obviously disrupt the armies before they could get into formation, before they could, disrupt their supply lines, etc., etc. So,
favorite tactic of Caesar, I believe, as well. So that's
okay, yes,
yes, definitely an apt name for your novel.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So these guys were very, very good at this, and they won a lot of money, and that's why they were very, very popular during wartime. The problem came during peacetime. So if you're a king, you've hired all these mercenaries to come and, either win land for you or defend it for you, whatever your poison. And then peace comes along, and you've got all these people, all these, war-happy noblemen who aren't getting paid. So if you don't pay them, they then start attacking your towns and cities and taking what they think they are owed. So at the end of the War of the Sicilian Vespers, you have this problem of peace has just been signed, and now the King of Sicily needs to do something with all these mercenaries. Well, Roger de Flor was the answer to that problem, because he said, well, I'll take all these men off your hands, and I'll form my own mercenary group, which he called the Catalan Company, named because a lot of the men were from Catalonia, and I'll take them off, and we'll have adventures and make lots of money. So that's kind of how it formed. There's more to it, and there's more of a personal story to why Roger de Flor made the decisions he did, but I'll leave that for your readers to discuss.
Excellent.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I'm very, very excited to write the sequel, because it's going to really feed into exactly what you talk about on your podcast. Because then, as I say, much of the first book focuses on Roger's early life in Europe. The second book is going to focus on the adventures that took place throughout Anatolia. So and as I say, the beginnings of the Ottoman Empire and how they conflicted with the Byzantines.
Well, at the risk of speaking for my listeners, Dan, I would like to thank you very much for coming on the podcast, sir. And we are all very much looking forward to the publication of your first work. And you are on Twitter, is that correct?
I am, yeah. At Dan Cross Author, all one word.
And you,
yeah, please feel free to follow me.
Excellent. And you also have a website as well. Can you tell my listeners what
that's www.dan-cross.com. But to any listeners who are aspiring authors, or do want any advice, or just to talk things through, feel free to reach out at any time. I'd love to talk to you. And follow my blog on my website, where I'm documenting my journey to, it's called Becoming an Author, because I want to, it's quite an alien process to people who don't have anyone in the industry already. If you don't know anyone else who's published a book, or an editor or a publisher, you sometimes feel like you're fumbling in the dark. And I'm hoping that my blog will make the journey a bit more palatable and a bit more accessible to everyone else. So yeah, feel free to give it a read and post me any questions.
All right. Well, Dan Cross, thank you very much for being on the show, sir.
Thank you so much, Frank. It was lovely talking to you.